We are honored to have a leader and a custodian of democracy amongst us. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Prime Minister of the Hellenic Republic, Mr. Kyriakos Mitsotakis, in a keynote conversation with Steven Erlanger, Chief Diplomatic Correspondent of the New York Times.
I guess we're waiting for photographers. Thank you, Achilles. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister. It's a great pleasure to have you here. Thank you for honoring the forum with your presence. So for the people who've been brave enough to be in the room with us and those watching, a very good morning to you. We have half an hour, and I want to get to a bunch of topics. So I'm going to skip a lot of the politenesses. Start with the deal you just did with Emmanuel Macron. You're buying frigates and planes from the French. There's talk of an alliance, of some kind of alliance. But what are the French committed to do other than sell you stuff?
We did sign with President Macron a strategic partnership agreement, which essentially confirms the fact that we have a long-standing strategic partnership with France, which essentially goes back centuries. I shouldn't forget that this partnership was signed on the 200th anniversary of the beginning of the War of Independence, and the French were one of the three powers who helped us establish the modern.
Well, that was then.
The modern Greek state. But to get to your point, there's an article in the treaty that was signed, which is a mutual assistance clause, which essentially says that if any of the two countries is attacked, if its territory is challenged, if sovereignty is challenged, then there is an obligation by the other party to assist it. And this is a strategic partnership which, in my mind, goes, I would say, probably above and beyond the mutual assistance clauses that are currently included in the European treaties. In the sense that the phrasing is probably slightly stronger, but it also signifies the importance that France assigns to the broader region of the Eastern Mediterranean. France stood by Greece during the difficult summer of 2020. They made their intentions very, very clear.
What do you say when people say this is just your payback for that?
I'd say that we were in the market to purchase new surface ships. I think we struck a good deal. The French frigates were the ones that were actually recommended by our Navy. Our Navy considered this to be the best option. So I would say we bought the best ships at the best price with a very quick delivery schedule. And on top of that, we negotiated what I think is a mutually beneficial strategic partnership agreement.
How much do you think that the price and the urgency was affected by Emmanuel Macron's re-election campaign? He's up for election in April.
We were the buyers, and I need to point out that Greece had not invested in its navy for almost 20 years in terms of new surface ships, and we purchased a ship that will usher the navy into a new digital era, and a ship that will give us a very strong deterrence capability for the next decades, and we have an obligation to make sure that we have the capacity to defend ourselves, but at the same time, within the context of NATO, we are adding resources to our transatlantic alliance. There's a lot of talk, as you know, in Europe about the interoperability of our defense capabilities. Well, we're taking a step in that direction. I think the stronger the European pillar of NATO is, the stronger NATO is as an alliance. We had this discussion with our American partners. They've been pushing us, not Greece, because we're spending a lot on defense, but other European partners, to get our act together when it comes to defense. Well, it's a step in the right direction.
Right. Just don't buy French diesel-powered submarines, because that could get you into trouble with
for the moment, we have purchased German submarines, and we're quite happy with that purchase.
So, I mean, why, in the context of a NATO alliance, do you need another alliance? aren't you supposed to be allies anyway?
No,
I mean, what does Article 5 mean if it doesn't mean exactly what you said this alliance is supposed to say, which is that that people come to the aid of member countries whose territory is threatened. That's what Article 5 is about. So why do you need something else?
Well, I'll be very open with you, Stephen. Does Article 5 apply in the case of an attack by a NATO member?
No.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
NATO has never been very clear on that issue. My obligation is to defend my country and to form the necessary alliances over and above the security arrangements that we already have. Now, on your topic, do we need a separate alliance within NATO? I would argue that Europe, as a continent, needs to align its economic strength with its geopolitical ambitions. And yes, there may be missions that are of particular European interest in the Sahel, in the Middle East, in the Eastern Mediterranean, where NATO may not want to be involved. So I see these two initiatives as fully complementary, but also as a very clear statement by Europe, should we manage to get to that point, that we're willing and able to take initiatives even without the approval of NATO. That would mean, to be very open, without the approval of the United States.
Sure. But the United States is also one of your best allies in the Eastern Mediterranean. So,
but that is true. And
so what's the anxiety? I don't quite understand.
First of all, there is no quote-unquote anxiety. We are a country that, after a decade of severe economic crisis, now has the ability to reinvest in our armed forces. We have a strategic partnership with the United States that is going from strength to strength. We're about to sign, if everything goes according to plan, a new 5-year mutual defense and cooperation agreement with the United States. And this partnership has a lot of value to us, and I think it also has a lot of value to the United States. But again, it seems to me that NATO, both Greece, France, and the United States are NATO members, so there is no real competition here. We're talking about complementary initiatives.
So, I mean, would you regard this as NATO not being quite as brain dead as Mr. Macron thinks?
I never believed that NATO was brain dead, but I do believe that NATO, through its 2030 initiative, needs to rethink its priorities. It is still the most successul alliance in the history of the world, and we're very proud and active members of NATO.
Yes. I mean, some people will say domestically, you already, according to NATO figures, spend 2.58% of GDP on defense, which is quite high in NATO terms. It's certainly above what NATO asks for. Turkey, of course, spends 2.72% of GDP, and it's a bigger country. So I'm not saying it's unjustified. But what I'm asking is, given the inequalities in Greece, which are real in every country, but perhaps have been magnified by COVID, given health crisis, given the environmental crisis, the big fires this summer, what do you say to people who say, well, you know, frankly, this money could be better spent, that Turkey isn't quite the imminent threat that some people think, and that you have other demands for this money?
Well, I think it's a very fair question. I would answer that these are long-term defense contracts spread over many years, over a decade, if you look at the repayment schedules, that were fully in line with our fiscal commitments, and that these investments are not at the expense of our other priorities. You're very right to point out that as the economy is again recovering, and as we move, if I were to borrow, you know, the theme of the conference, from resilience to renewal, my number one priority is how do we reduce inequalities in this new growth model I'm championing for Greece. At the same time, we cannot ignore the fact that we live in a very complicated neighborhood. It is a reality of geography which we cannot ignore. I do not intend to enter into an arms race with Turkey. And I'm always reaching out a hand of friendship to Turkey. We have big differences on many issues, but there should be a way to solve these differences through dialogue. At the same time, we will defend our territory, our territorial integrity, our sovereignty, our sovereign rights, and in order to do so, we need a strong deterrence
and your
capability.
territorial waters, which are extensive.
Indeed. Hence, and we should not forget, Greece, historically, I mean, this is the, the Athens Democracy Forum, and we should not forget that Athens, ancient Athens, I mean, the cradle of democracy, was a very strong naval power, and that the battle essentially that was at the foundation of the miracle of the 5th century of classical Athens was a naval battle. The Battle of Salamis, actually, last year we celebrated 2,500 years. So this is a country with a very strong naval tradition.
Well, let's not have another one.
No, we don't need to. But that's that is exactly the purpose of having a strong deterrence capability.
Right. But one of the interesting things, of course, is the migration question. Now, obviously, Greece, Italy, I mean, you've suffered a lot. I mean, you're closest to all the migratory flows, and it creates domestic issues and problems, and the rest of Europe has not been terribly generous since 2015, certainly in kind of distributing people. So the charges are, of course, that you're actively, with Frontex, pushing people back toward Turkey. There was a period where Turkey was alleged to be instrumentalizing migrants and pushing them outward. That doesn't seem to happen now. But what do you, I mean, obviously you can defend your territory, that's reasonable and so on, but what about the charges that you're being a little too aggressive and that you're violating the spirit of humanitarian refugee law?
I am unapologetic about defending our borders. We should not forget that back in 2020, in March 2020, Turkey instrumentalized the migration issue and actively encouraged and facilitated tens of thousands of people to try to cross into Greece. We said no, we defended our land border. We are defending our sea border, but we're doing it with full respect to human rights, putting the protection of people at sea always as a first priority. No one has drowned in the Aegean this year, and I'm particularly proud of the work that my Coast Guard is doing in saving people at risk. At the same time, on the humanitarian side, since we took over, we addressed the problem of unaccompanied minors. A horrible story, really, of literally young boys and girls frequently abused in our facilities. We've set up new facilities. I will be going to Samos tomorrow to inaugurate a new state-of-the-art facility that offers people who arrive on Samos and whose applications are still being processed access to high-quality facilities. We've granted asylum to tens of thousands of people who are entitled asylum, and we're actively trying to integrate them into Greek society. So I can see, I see no conflict between vigilantly defending our borders and, yes, intercepting boats at sea, while at the same time behaving in a totally humanitarian manner and taking care of those people whose lives are at risk.
Do you think Europe is going to help further? I mean, it's okay, it helps you build new camps, but it's not taking people. And how are you doing at sending people back who actually do not qualify, not so well, right? And then how worried are you about new chaos in Afghanistan producing a kind of slower but persistent flow of asylum seekers, refugees, migrants?
First of all, we have every interest in working with Turkey to contain illegal flows of migrants and to eradicate the smuggler networks that prey on vulnerable people. And the fact that the number of people arriving on Greek islands has been reduced by almost 90% over 2 years, I think is an indication that we're actually breaking down that quote-unquote business model. I think Turkey can do more in this direction. They should be able to readmit, according to our agreement, people whose applications have been declined. They're not doing it at present.
That's the point.
They're not doing it at present.
How many people are we talking about?
Well, I mean, right now we have close to 2,000 people we could return from the islands, and I think it would be a very good indication by Turkey that they're actually looking to improve the level of cooperation between Europe, because this was a European agreement, and Turkey on the issue of migration. Now, are we concerned about Afghanistan? Of course we are, but I think there is a general understanding in Europe that we will not tolerate, we will not accept the uncontrolled migratory waves that we had to deal with in 2015.
I have to say the language from Europe is, it's pretty ugly sometimes, I have to say. And yes, we're all in favor of human rights and values, but don't come, we will stop you. That's really the message.
But at the same time, there has been a lack of European solidarity. Yeah. The fact that we have not been able to agree on a common migration and asylum pact is due to the fact that some countries simply consider this not to be their problem at all, placing all the burden.
Northern countries.
Placing all the, or Eastern countries, placing all the burden on frontline states, and this is unfair. This is not just a question of money. Of course, we receive money by Europe to build our facilities, but we should really see more solidarity. We should start by, first of all, having common asylum rules, so as to avoid this phenomenon of asylum shopping. But I am not particularly optimistic that we will make significant progress on this file in the foreseeable future.
It just feels like walls are becoming very popular. I mean, you've just built a sort of wall. The Turks are building a wall with Iran. When Orban built a wall, it was considered terrible. And then later on, people thought, oh, well, no, it's okay. He's defending the Schengen borders.
But I think it was one of your colleagues, Tom Friedman, who wrote an article about being able to build a big wall and also have a big gate. Yes, defending our borders is necessary. But what is the alternative? The alternative is organized migration in a manner that does not endanger people and that actually serves their need. For example, we're in discussion with Egypt to put together what I think is going to be a very innovative pilot program to cover our needs in the agricultural sector, where we simply do not have enough people to work in our fields. I think this would be a win-win solution, and it would send a signal that, yes, we can accommodate people based on the rules that we set, and this should not happen in an uncontrolled way.
No, I mean, it's just sometimes it's not for here, but the whole refugee convention probably needs to be rethought. It's not World War II anymore. You're going to have climate migration. You're going to have all kinds of different kinds of asylum seekers, and the conventions aren't prepared for any of this.
Yeah, and we should not forget that the people who arrive in Greece are leaving Turkey. Yes. And in Turkey, if they're in Turkey, they're not fleeing war and persecution in Turkey.
No, it's true, but one should also, I mean, this is not to argue with you, but I mean, I also respect Turkey for holding more than 4 million refugees, asylum seekers.
I've been very open in acknowledging the significant role that Turkey is playing in managing the migration crisis, and that is why I urge Europe to work with Turkey constructively, but we both need to make sure that we keep our end of the bargain. And what is very, very clear is that what happened in March 2020 cannot and will not be repeated.
Another topic, if I may. You did a very good job in Greece with the first wave of vaccination and COVID, but you're now only at 55%, maybe 58%. I'm
slightly
not sure.
higher. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it's an old figure, but it's stalled. And part of it, as in my country, it's politicized, and part of it's the church, part of it's lots of things. So how do you explain this? Is this the residue of populism? Is this a deep anti-state mistrust? Is this the mistrust of authority? Is this disinformation from outside? How do you explain all this?
It's probably a little bit of everything. Certainly vaccinations have been less politicized in Greece than in your country. Having said that, we have not had the full support of the opposition when it comes to vaccination. Very prominent opposition figures, ex-minister of health has practically been an anti-vaxxer, so we have not had the full support of the opposition. But there are also deep-rooted, cultural issues. If you look at rural areas, they lag behind the big cities. We're trying to explain and persuade people that obviously vaccination is the right thing to do and the only protection they have against the fourth wave of the pandemic. And if you look at the data, we have around 300 people in our intensive care units as we speak. More than 90% are unvaccinated. So people who are not vaccinated are they really risk getting seriously ill and possibly even dying. But we know that we probably can push up, our vaccination rates beyond where we are now. We're slightly below the EU average, right. So it's not I'd say we started very well, but we're bumping into the sort of resistance that many other countries are facing. Having said that, there are countries.
Is there anything unique about the resistance here?
No, I don't think there's something particularly unique. I think there's a combination of sort of very strong anti-vax feelings that you see everywhere, with still some skepticism about the efficacy of the vaccines.
Of course, what's in it?
Of course, there are countries, and such as Portugal, which have done remarkably well, and we can do better. We will not impose additional, sort of mandatory vaccinations. I've reached the conclusion that this would not be helpful. But we will continue.
Not even in healthcare?
We've done it in healthcare
That's
already.
what I thought.
But I want to make it very clear. Right. If you are unvaccinated, you will not have access to entertainment, you will not have access to sports facilities, and you need to constantly test and pay for your own tests. And I think as we move indoors in October or November, where vaccinations are mandatory now in order to be able to access a restaurant, I think more people, especially young people, will think twice about getting vaccinated, sure, because otherwise it will just be a big hassle.
One of the things that Greece did early, which kind of upset Brussels a little bit, was you opened up to tourism very early. When Brussels was saying, have you noticed, did it cause any spike that you noticed or not?
Not really. I need to point out that we were the first, I was the first at the European Council last December to raise the issue of the EU digital certificate. Mm-hmm. I told my colleagues then, I know it's gloomy, it's winter, it's dark, mm-hmm, but come summer people will want to travel. So let's make sure we work on this early. And it was a big success. We have this digital certificate.
Yeah, it's great, by the way.
It really facilitated travel. Our tourism did better than we expected. We opened to the American market much earlier than many of our quote-unquote competitors. We had 10 non-stop flights into Athens daily from the US, and we're very, very happy that US tourists and visitors came to Greece. I think they had a great time, and we saw no real spike in COVID due to tourism.
A couple other things. We don't have tons of time left. North Macedonia and enlargement. Now, North Macedonia has been a neuralgic issue in Greece for historical reasons. Do you support Bulgaria in its resistance to allowing accession to go ahead? Or is it something you just don't talk about? Or
we don't support it. We don't support Bulgaria. We think it's an unnecessary complication. Mm-hmm. We're going to be meeting in a couple of days in Slovenia. We need to offer the world, the Western Balkans, a very clear European perspective. We need to openly talk about enlargement. We need to send a signal that, in 10, 15 years, as long as it will take, but the Western Balkans belong in Europe.
Because this vacuum there.
Because if you know, the vacuum is going to be the vacuum is going to be occupied by other players,
which is already happening.
Look, I was also very clear when it comes to Northern Macedonia. There were issues, aspects of the deal that was done by the previous government I did not like. I did not vote for the deal, but I said very clearly that if the deal is ratified by Parliament, I will respect it.
Yes.
It's an international obligation of the country, and a country that is a proponent of international law needs to respect international treaties.
Right. Because the Albanians, Edi Rama is being very vocal these days about how absurd this is. So I think people will be glad to hear what you've just said. Quickly now, I think, German election. I mean, it's still up in the air, but you're going to have, whoever's the chancellor, it will be pro-European, it'll be pro-NATO, pro-transatlantic alliance, but it's not so clear what the position will be on collective debt, on new forms of fiscal integration, of whether one can be more flexible on fiscal rules. What's your take so far?
First of all, I know both Olaf Scholz and Armin Laschet. I think we will work very well with
whomever.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to the German parties to decide who the next chancellor will be. Having said that, Germany made a big step, I think, in the right direction by accepting the concept of a European debt instrument, which was essentially behind the recovery fund. This is really big. It's an important moment in European integration. Greece will receive 32 billion euros in funds on top of the structural funds to help turbocharge our digital and green transformation. And that is why I'm very optimistic that we can sustain high growth rates for the next decade, which will significantly be above the Eurozone average. But on the question of the future of fiscal policy in Europe, I think we will have a very interesting discussion regarding the future of the Stability Pact. We had that discussion with Mario Draghi a week ago, and I think we agree on the principle that if we are to spend more on climate, and if we are also to spend more on defense because we want a geopolitical union, we need to incorporate these investments into our thinking. You can't have your cake and eat it at the same time. You cannot have very stringent fiscal rules while at the same time expect to invest in policies which will pay a dividend over the long term, not over the short term. So I do think that there will be more flexibility when it comes to fiscal policy without ignoring the fact that in a currency union, you need some sort of fiscal alignment. Well, and I am very confident that, if I speak for my country, Greece, come 2023, we will produce primary surpluses. We have a high debt we need to service, but it has relatively low repayment obligations for the next 12 years. Right. But I want to make sure that whatever we do is fiscally sustainable.
Yeah. No, because I mean, it's the euro is okay, but it's not finished. The single market's not finished. The banking union is not finished. Yeah. It's like a building where the foundations are there, but
not just the foundations. I think
some of the structures missing.
Yeah, but I do think that the recovery fund was a milestone.
Yes.
Because this could become a permanent tool. In order for it to become a permanent tool, we, the member states, have to prove that we will make good use of the funds.
Do you think the Commission's capable of ensuring that?
I think so.
I'm not.
No, I do think so. They have made a very good job at scrutinizing the plans that we have submitted. They're in line with the country-specific recommendations, so they do focus on real reforms. I'm very proud of our plan.
They praise your plan.
Our plan has been praised. It was put together by Greeks, for Greeks, in particular for the young generation, because the biggest inequality today is not income inequality, it's a generational inequality. It's young people feeling that they will live worse than their parents, and this is of primary concern to me.
We are basically out of time, but I'd want to thank you for being patient with my interruptions, for speaking so openly, and I wish you luck with all the challenges ahead, because they are many, and not just generational, but financial, lots of other ways. So thank you, Mr. Prime Minister,
Thank you
very, very much.
Thank you very much.